Imagine trusting your emperor completely, and then watching him order the deaths of the very senators who put him in power. This happened, not in a forgotten myth, but in the marble halls of Rome, where paranoia became policy, and loyalty became a death sentence. At the height of its power, this empire controlled millions of lives across 3 continents. Its armies were unstoppable, its wealth unimaginable, and yet, it was rotting from the inside, poisoned by something far more dangerous than any enemy at its gates: fear planted by its own rulers. Citizens vanished in the night. Neighbors reported neighbors. Wealthy families watched their fortunes seized, their names erased from history, simply because someone in power decided they were a threat. The most trusted advisors were executed without trial. Even the emperor's own family was not safe from the purges he unleashed. By the time the smoke cleared, an empire that once commanded the loyalty of an entire world had taught its people a terrifying lesson. Trust nothing. Trust no one, not even the throne itself. How does the most powerful civilization on earth turn its own greatness into its own executioner? The answer is buried in blood, silence, and betrayal, and it starts long before the first head rolled. To understand how this collapse began, you have to go back to the empire's golden age, a time when its capital gleamed with marble temples, its legions marched unopposed, and its citizens believed they were untouchable. This was Rome, centuries into its rise, ruled by emperors who inherited not just a throne, but absolute, unchecked power. The Senate, once a body of genuine debate, had become a chamber of frightened men who nodded along to survive. Real power belonged to one person, and one person's fear, ambition, or madness could rewrite the fate of millions. Some emperors ruled with genuine skill. Others were consumed by suspicion the moment they took the throne. They surrounded themselves with spies. They rewarded informants who whispered accusations, true or invented, against anyone who might be plotting against them. A rival's ambition, a senator's wealth, even an offhand joke overheard at a banquet, could be twisted into treason. Wealthy citizens began hiding their fortunes. Families stopped speaking freely at dinner, afraid a servant might report them for the smallest complaint. The empire that once celebrated open debate and civic pride was quietly transforming into something else entirely, a place where silence was survival and ambition was a death warrant. And then came the moment that shattered any illusion of safety. An emperor, convinced that even his closest allies were conspiring against him, ordered a purge so vast it would consume not strangers, but the very people who had helped build his empire: friends, generals, and eventually, members of his own bloodline. The nightmare wasn't coming from outside the walls. It was already inside the palace. Historical records from this era describe something chilling: a system of terror so effective it needed no army to enforce it, because citizens policed each other. Chroniclers who lived through it recorded lists of the condemned, posted publicly for all to see. These were the proscriptions, official notices stripping citizens of legal protection. Anyone could kill a person on that list and claim a reward. Their property was seized by the state. Their families were left with nothing, and often nowhere safe to go. Under some of the empire's most infamous rulers, accusations didn't require evidence. A single rumor, delivered by a rival hoping to inherit someone's estate, could be enough. Trials, when they happened at all, were theater. The outcome was already decided before the accused ever spoke. Here is the detail that redefines everything. Many of the people executed in these purges were not enemies of the empire. They were its architects, generals who had won wars for Rome, senators who had served for decades, even the trusted mentors and closest friends of the men who condemned them, forced into exile or ordered to end their own lives. The very loyalty that built the empire's power became, in the eyes of a paranoid ruler, evidence of a threat too dangerous to ignore. One respected historian of the age described an atmosphere so poisoned by suspicion that even silence could be read as guilt, and speaking out was almost certainly fatal. People stopped writing letters. Friendships were abandoned for safety. The empire's own capital became, for its most prominent citizens, more dangerous than any battlefield they had ever fought on. This wasn't chaos. It was policy, a deliberate, calculated use of terror to maintain control, one that worked, for a while, exactly as intended. But terror is a currency that always runs out, and when it did, the empire would pay a price far greater than anyone in power had imagined. The consequences were catastrophic, and they didn't stay contained to the palace. Provinces that once sent soldiers and taxes loyally began to question a government that devoured its own best people. Generals who feared execution for simply being competent started plotting rebellions of their own, not out of ambition, but out of survival. The empire had taught its most capable citizens a brutal lesson. Success invited suspicion, and loyalty was no protection at all. Some of the tyrants responsible met violent ends themselves, cut down by the very guards or officials they once trusted, in the same halls where they had ordered countless executions. Others were forced from power entirely, their names later condemned by the Senate, in a practice historians call damnatio memoriae, a formal effort to erase a ruler from history itself, chiseled from monuments and struck from official records. But the deeper damage couldn't be undone. Trust between citizens and their government had been shattered. An empire built on civic pride and shared identity was left with a population that had learned, generation after generation, to say nothing, trust no one, and expect betrayal from the top. That erosion, quiet, invisible, and generational, weakened the empire's foundations long before any invading force ever crossed its borders. Why does this matter today? Because history keeps offering the same warning in different costumes. Any government, any institution, any system that turns its instruments of power inward against its own people sacrifices something it can never fully recover: the trust that held it together in the first place. Empires don't only fall to outside armies. Some die from the inside, exactly the way this one did. Slowly, quietly, and by their own hand. Power, left unchecked, doesn't just corrupt the person holding it. It corrupts everyone forced to survive underneath it. This empire didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it forgot that loyalty cannot be commanded through fear, only earned through trust. And once that trust is gone, no army, no wealth, and no throne can hold a civilization together. Maybe that's the most unsettling truth buried in all of this. The greatest threat to any empire was never a foreign army waiting beyond its borders. It was the quiet, creeping fear it planted in its own people. One purge, one silence, one betrayal at a time. So ask yourself, when trust disappears from the top, how long can anything really survive underneath it? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if this dark chapter of history moved you, subscribe, because there are more forbidden stories like this one, still buried, still waiting to be exposed.